Lawrence and Liv Allen for inviting me to present at this org support series. How are y'all doing today? I know it's a busy time of year, so I'm glad you all made it. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it, and so does the involvement team, so thank you. First, I wanted to introduce myself. So my name is Melena Oswald. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Student Life Specialist in the Dean of Students office here on campus. So to describe a bit about my role first, I work with the care team on campus. How many of you have heard of care team? Awesome, a lot of you have. So I work to provide mental health outreach and support to students with other members in the Dean of Students office. It's a great team that we have trying to bridge the gap so that students can get connected to mental health resources maybe before they start struggling even more. And then I also do some ombudsman type of work, which I know that word's a little confusing. It's basically just helping students with any concerns, grievances, complaints that they may have. And then I also help students if they need to request a medical withdrawal for the semester. So let's say there's something that happens and they need surgery, physical health condition, mental health condition, need to do inpatient treatment, whatever it may be. If students need to request a medical withdrawal, I can help them with that. So that's a brief overview of my position in the Dean of Students office. And this is about surviving leadership, burnout, coping, and self-care. Because from my understanding, most of you are leaders on campus within your student org or you're members of a student org, so we're talking about being able to survive that leadership position, being able to take care of yourself while also being a leader for others, and then how to prevent burnout, how to cope with burnout, and talking about self-care. Thank you all again for being here. So I do have my master's degree in social work from UW-Whitewater. I graduated in May, and I am a certified advanced practice social worker. I also have my bachelor's degree in psychology and a minor in Spanish from Whitewater as well, so a double alum of sorts. And I am a passionate mental health awareness and suicide prevention advocate. I have done a lot of work with mental health nonprofits, both nationally and locally, so that has been awesome. That's one of my passions. And then I was the secretary of UW-Whitewater Active Minds for 3 years on campus here when I was an undergrad and a graduate student. So that was where my passion was. And I loved it so much. That's what got me into doing this work. That's what got me into loving to present so much. So I owe a lot of where I am now to Active Minds. So first, we're going to talk about mental health conditions, what the difference is between the two. So what is mental health? When we think about this, we might hear this term all the time, but we might not actually know what it means. So this is being emotionally, psychologically, and socially well. It's our well-being in all of those areas, and how we think, feel, and act is all impacted by our mental health and impacts our mental health. When we feel well mentally, we're able to cope with stress in positive ways. We're able to work productively in our everyday life. And you might notice that if your mental health is starting to decline, you're starting to feel less mentally well, those areas might start to become impacted. Coping with stress might become more difficult. You might be coping with stress in more negative ways compared to positive ways. It might be more difficult to work productively in your everyday life. You might notice it impacting many areas of your life. So something important to note, mental health is just as important as physical health. It's so important to decrease the stigma surrounding mental health because something that we all have is mental health. We all have mental health. We do not all have mental health conditions though, although they are very common. So a mental health condition is a condition that affects a person's thinking, feeling, behavior, and or mood. And it can impact a person's everyday life. It can impact how they relate to other people, their social relationships, emotional. And mental health conditions are very common, so I just want to let you all know that if you are living with a mental health condition, you are not alone in that experience and there is help available. They are very, very common. 50% of us will experience a mental health condition at some point during our life, and we all know somebody who's impacted by a mental health condition. So that's why it's very important to erase the stigma surrounding mental health and mental health conditions. So, just some statistics again to normalize mental health conditions. 1 in 5 adults experience a mental health condition each year. Over half of adults with a mental health condition do not receive treatment, and the main reason because of that, why people don't seek treatment, is because of stigma surrounding mental health and how people believe that they will be looked at if they do seek treatment, which is why erasing the stigma around mental health is so important, so that more people feel okay enough to receive treatment and not feel like they'll be looked at differently if they do receive treatment. And over 50 million Americans are experiencing a mental health condition. So looking at this slide, you can just see that mental health conditions are extremely common. And again, we're all impacted by mental health conditions just because we all know somebody who is living with one. We may not all have a mental health condition in this room, but again, we all do have mental health. So moving on to leadership in mental health, which is why I'm sure you all are here, but just wanted to give that brief introduction of explaining mental health and mental health conditions. Protecting your own mental health as a leader is very important because we have to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves before we're taking care of others, before we're leading and mentoring others. So there are 5 different categories that I will explain for protecting your own mental health as a leader. The first is practicing self-awareness. So this is just having a greater awareness of yourself, dedicating time to learn more about yourself, and having high self-awareness tends to lead to more direction, purpose, influence, and success. And becoming aware of your own feelings and knowing when it's time to take a break and practice self-care is so important as well. Again, so that you're taking care of your mental health and that you're able to be there for your team or the people that you're leading in your organization. Something I love that my current supervisor in the Dean of Students office, he always tells me that it's so important to practice self-care, to set boundaries. Whenever I'm working during my lunch break, he's like, Milena, you need to stop. You need to just eat your lunch. Don't worry about work until 1 p.m. He's like, you have to take that hour. And I'm so grateful that I have a supervisor who prioritizes mental health and self-care, because if he weren't there, I might sometimes forget to practice self-care. And our job can be really tough sometimes, and it's really important to practice self-care. So I encourage you all to practice self-care, practice self-awareness, know what you need to do when you start to feel those impacts of burnout, and we will talk about that in a bit as well. Setting boundaries. This is so important because setting boundaries, it shows that you respect yourself. If you respect yourself enough to set boundaries, other people will respect them too. So this is a form of self-care because you're taking care of yourself by whether it's saying no if you have too many obligations or just saying that you're not able to commit to certain things at this time. It's so important just to protect your own peace. So that could look like, leaving work at work. That's something that I have to do. Once I step away from the Dean of Students office, I'm like, okay, leaving work there, and now I'm able to, drive home and just think about whatever else I want to think about that isn't related to work. It's important to have that separation. For students, well, I'm sure a lot of you have jobs too, so leaving work at work is important, but also for students that could look like leaving school at school. And I know that can be really, really hard because students have assignments all the time. There's always something you could be thinking about, but something that I found to be helpful as a student was I would try to dedicate at least one day to not have to do anything school related. So I think I made that either Saturday or Sunday, can't remember, but I tried so hard just to have one day where I was not thinking about school, not turning in assignments, doing exams, whatever it may be, and that really helped me with my own mental health, just having one day to not think about that. Taking care of your mental and physical health is really important because, again, mental health is just as important as physical health. So if you practice healthy routines, you model that to your team as well. So if you start setting boundaries, if you start practicing self-care, you start to model that to your team members and the people that you're leading. showing that it's okay to practice self-care. It's okay to take breaks. And it's important to take breaks even when you are working or even when you are at an event. I know that can be difficult, but just like I was saying about at my current job at work, I make sure that I have that hour to just have a break. So whether your break looks like taking 15 minutes between classes, just to chill out, to, maybe scroll on TikTok for a bit, whatever you need to do for self-care, it's really, really important just to take that break. Or if you just want to set a timer when you're studying, to stop studying for a bit. Or when you are at an event with one of your organizations and you're leading that event, that can be really stressful, right? You're putting so much time and energy into that event and you want it to go well. So it's important to take a break even if you're at that event when you can, even if it's just a minute of focusing on your breathing. Next, it's important to give yourself grace. So if you are in a leadership position, it can be really difficult because you might set really high expectations for yourself. I know a lot of executive board members for organizations set extremely high standards for themselves, and it's okay to give yourself some grace. You don't have to do it all. You don't have to be everything for every single person. It's not possible, so it's really important to delegate different tasks. It's also important to extend grace to others. So while giving yourself grace, extending that grace to others can look like checking in on your team. So, if you are meeting with your executive board members, I'm not sure how many of you are all executive board position members for a student org or club, but this can look like maybe not getting right to business when you're meeting with your team. It's important to get to that eventually, but making sure you're checking in with their team and asking, how are you doing? How are you really doing? Some students or people in general just result to saying, I'm good, how are you? It's the default most of the time. So really asking people how they're doing, or if you've noticed that one of your members or someone you're leading has been struggling recently, or maybe they just look tired all the time, or they just look exhausted, whatever it may be, just checking in with them and saying, hey, I've noticed that you have seemed a bit tired lately. What's going on? It's just really important to extend that grace to others, check in on your team members, and support your team members, connect them with resources if it's necessary. I'll be going over some resources in a bit too, just so that you all have them. And try not to put so much pressure on your team either. I know that can be difficult too because we feel like we have so much pressure on ourselves being part of leadership, part of a team, but trying not to put so much pressure on team members either because we can only all do so much, right? We're only human. None of us are perfect. So just making sure we're giving grace to ourselves and extending grace to others. Protecting the mental health of your team. So this can look like modeling. So again, like I mentioned with my supervisor, he has shown me how to protect and prioritize my own mental health. I've had some professors who have shown me that as well when I was going throughout my undergraduate and my master's program, who really showed me that it's important to practice self-care. When I was going through my master's program, we would have these weekly logs for our internship, and our instructors would make us write down what we were doing for self-care because they realized that that work is not easy and that if we're not practicing self-care, it will lead to burnout. So it's really important to model that to your team so that they know that they can practice self-care and that they can take breaks and that it's important to you, so it should be important to them as well. Advocating, so sharing mental health resources with your team, super important. If you notice someone is maybe having a rough time and they just need a few resources, just share any that you may know or refer them to someone who does know more resources than you may know. Checking your language, I'm a huge mental health advocate, so I like to add these two down here, check your language and destigmatize mental health. And what I mean by that is, if we're talking about mental health conditions as adjectives, that is not great. So, if you hear people saying things like, the weather has been really bipolar recently, it's not great to say that. It's better to say, the weather has been changing a lot recently, and just not using mental health conditions as adjectives. Another example is when people say, like, if they're organized, they're like, oh, I'm so OCD. And if you don't actually live with OCD, that's very harmful to people who do live with that mental health condition, because it makes it seem like it's not normalized or that it's not okay to have that mental health condition. So just like to mention those things, similar lines, calling people crazy, insane, psycho, those are not great. So just check your language, and it's really important to check your language so that we are destigmatizing mental health, and again, not using mental health conditions as adjectives or just using them kind of willy-nilly. Being vulnerable. So it's important to listen and empathize when team members talk about their mental health. So I think something that would happen when being a part of Active Minds is that, that is a mental health awareness organization, suicide prevention organization. And there were times that members would come up to our executive board and share some really personal things. And our executive board was there to listen, but none of us were trained professionals at the time. So we knew that we needed to refer that student to higher care, and that's okay. So just make sure that you're being there for your team members, and maybe if you're not able to handle that one day, maybe you're going through your own thing, just making sure you have at least some team member you can refer them to, some professional or just instructor, somebody on campus that you can refer that person to so that they're not going through that alone. And then if you feel comfortable, normalize talking about your own mental health just by sharing your own experiences. Maybe you've gone through something similar that one of your team members brings up, and you feel like self-disclosing and saying, hey, I've been through something really similar, not saying you've been through the exact same thing, but hey, I've been through something similar and this is how I got through it. This is what works for me. What have you been doing? What works for you? Really, really important to talk about mental health. And again, checking in on your team, making sure they're doing okay, because we all have to be doing well mentally before we can even be in a leadership position. We have to make sure we're taking care of ourselves first, otherwise it makes taking care of others extremely, extremely difficult. All right, so some discussion questions that I'll just have you all talk about at your table. And if you are at a table by yourself, feel free to move over to another table and talk about this. But without naming the member, share a time that a member in your group disclosed to you that they were going through a difficult time. What was your response to them sharing those concerns? Where did you direct them for additional resources or support? So feel free to talk at your table. I'll just have a few tables share out if you feel comfortable, and I'll give you about 2-3 minutes just so that we stay on track here.
Not necessarily their own stories, but I know a lot of people are like, oh, my friend is, I lost my friend to suicide. I have a family member who lost to suicide. I know somebody who has ideations, and like, there's just a lot of like vulnerable people at someone's packing, and like, I remember feeling like I was, obviously empathizing and willing to listen, and that's my job as a board member, but like, if you are seriously struggling or you know someone that's seriously struggling, here are all these resources that you can access to. Sometimes people like, just they see you in that leadership role the person to share, which yes, of course, but I'm not a trained professional, right? Like,
And I think that's something that we have to keep in our minds on is that a lot of people don't.
totally forgot about that. Yeah, there was a lot of like that event is really heavy. There was a lot of sharing to all of us volunteers, and there's, it's already a heavy event, and then people are sharing their own stories. And it can get a little overwhelming. You just gotta listen and then appreciate,
Recognize
send
a
them
lot of people
to
are very
somebody who can actually do something.
All right, thank you all for coming together and sharing with your group. So, does anybody feel comfortable sharing what they talked about with their group? And again, without naming any members or any people. Yeah.
So a member of my club essentially came to me and told me that they were suffering from a seasonal affective disorder essentially. They had been having suicidal thoughts. They had been having thoughts of harming themselves. And being a mandated reporter, I first off had to report that information, but secondly, I also referred them to the university counseling services as well as the other services that are provided by our campus.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that. And what did you do to take care of yourself? Because hearing that can be really difficult.
Well, I suffer from a similar uh, thing, so I guess in the moment I kind of took a bit to kind of step back after that and kind of take a moment to decompress myself. And even in the midst of the actual conversation, I had to take a moment to kind of step away for like a half second, just kind of like recuperate, I guess. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate that. And I'm sure the group appreciates your vulnerability as well. Thank you. And you just said something really important about what we were talking about earlier, where if you need to take a break, if you need to step away for a minute just because it's becoming a bit too much, it's okay to step away. It's okay to take a break and just let that person know you'll come back to the conversation soon or the next day, whenever it may be. I know that was more of an urgent situation, so had to be taken care of pretty quickly, but just know it's okay to take that break. And then this is something my supervisor says. If I say that I've gone through a difficult day, and many people have mentioned things of that nature to me as well during my job, he said, okay, so what did you do to take care of yourself after that? And it makes me think, and I'm like, what did I do? I don't really know. And if I can't think of it, it's like I need to put something in practice to be doing after those sessions that can be really, really difficult. So thank you again for sharing that. Does anybody else want to share what you talked about at your table? Yes.
So last year, one of our members came up to all three of us that were on e-board last year and just expressed that they were experiencing like suicidal ideations. And so we sat down with them, had a conversation with them about it, referred them to winter counseling as well as UHCS, told them the benefits kind of both. And then we also got our faculty advisor involved as well, because they felt comfortable bringing him into the conversation. And then in our follow-up emails for like the next month, we also provided those resources for the rest of our members, because we were like, just because one person came to us doesn't mean that there isn't other people that are in our org that don't need those resources. And then Kaylee was talking about Sun Silence packing last year, and I was one of the support people there. And there was a guy who came up to me and expressed like his suicidal ideations and like showed like self-harm to me. And so I took a moment and I was like, I'll be right back. And then I went and grabbed one of the counselors, and he was able to help that student.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's so important too, like you were saying, Alexa, to share resources to all members, because you never know who could need them, who could benefit from them. And if one person is struggling, I'm sure there are other people who are struggling as well who might not just want to disclose what they're going through. But I think that's a really important point, and it's important to share those resources outward. And then being there for that student, that's really important. Thank you both for sharing. I appreciate it. We'll keep moving forward here. So I just want to read this quote because I really like it, but just going to read it in full. So, much like we have preventative health checkups, every leader should proactively seek out a form of self-inquiry via meditation, yoga, therapy, energy modalities, or better yet, in combination. Many of today's issues have resulted fundamentally from an inability to sit in silence by oneself with self-inquiry and observation. I just love that quote because it talks about self-awareness, and it also talks about proactively seeking out a form of self-inquiry, self-care. You know, I've mentioned my supervisor a lot just because he's had a huge impact on me and how I practice self-care and taking breaks, all of that. But he says that self-care should be proactive and we should be thinking about it. If something is going on during our day and we need a way to decompress, we should be thinking about that before the time that happens so that we know what to do when that happens and how we can practice that self-care, how we can recuperate, because again, that leads to lower burnout. It doesn't, sorry, tripping up on my own words, but if we're practicing self-care, it prevents burnout. So that's why it's so important. And I know I've mentioned that many times just because of how important it is. This is from NAMI, so the National Alliance on Mental Illness. It says, "You are not alone. Millions of people are affected by mental illness each year. Across the country, many people just like you work, perform, create, compete, laugh, love, and inspire every day." And I love this because one of NAMI's missions is just to connect people with mental health resources, make sure they're connected to care, and also letting people know that if they are experiencing a mental health condition, that doesn't have to limit their ability to achieve what they want to achieve. So on to burnout and how to cope, because I know right now is a difficult time. I know there are midterms and it's stressful. I've been meeting with a lot of students. I know they're stressed, so I'm sure some of you are stressed as well, but we will talk about burnout and how to cope. We'll also talk about the differences between stress and burnout because there is a difference between the two. So what is burnout? Again, kind of like mental health, you might just hear this word thrown around but might not actually know what it means. So this is a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress. So it's not just stress that maybe we experience for one day or a week, it's very prolonged. So if you're stressed for, maybe over 3 weeks to a month, a few months, even years, that's when burnout starts to become more prevalent. So burnout reduces productivity. It can lead to feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, cynicism, and resentfulness. And what's important to note about burnout is that it's a very gradual process and it can kind of creep up on you. So you might not notice that all of this stress is really impacting you and you've been stressed for a long time. And ultimately it can start to lead to burnout, but super gradual. You might have a difficult time noticing those warning signs of burnout because it can look like stress at times. But again, those feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, cynicism, and resentfulness are the main markers of difference between stress and burnout. So it's important to point out the warning signs since it might be kind of difficult to start to notice if you are beginning to feel burnout. So some of the psychological symptoms might be increased anxiety, low mood, difficulty concentrating, low commitment to role, loss of purpose, negative attitude toward coworkers, job, schoolwork, whatever it may be, cynicism, again, like mentioned before, and frustration. So this could look like if you're in your leadership role and this is something that you're super passionate about, you love going to your org meetings, you love planning those meetings and everything, the low commitment to role, loss of purpose, negative attitude, that could start to show up in your leadership role where maybe you don't feel as motivated to go to your org meetings, or maybe you're just not really feeling motivated to come up with your presentations or work with your e-board members, whatever it may be. And you may start to notice maybe there's some heightened anxiety, lower mood, some feelings of having difficulty concentrating, feeling frustrated. So those are some things to start to watch out for. And then we'll talk about, what you can do if you start to notice those signs. But physical symptoms could look like exhaustion, headaches, difficulty sleeping, weakened immune system, muscle tension. I know that can sound like, a whole host of other physical things that could be going on, but maybe if you start to notice some of these things in combination, some of the psychological and physical symptoms going hand in hand, so that, exhaustion along with the low commitment to role, or whatever it may be, whatever you notice for yourself. This graph shows the difference between stress and burnout. So stress is characterized by over-engagement, and burnout is characterized by disengagement. So that is one of the main differences between the two. So maybe if you're really, really stressed about class and exams and all of that, you're doing more than usual. Like you're studying more and you want to be more focused, more motivated. But on the other hand, burnout would be the disengagement, where you're just too stressed for such a long time that you don't feel motivated, you don't want to keep studying, and that stress is becoming less helpful to you. There is a positive type of stress called eustress. So that could be more so what we're talking about on the left-hand side, because stress can be helpful in some situations. It can motivate us. So then stress produces urgency, hyperactivity, whereas burnout produces helplessness and hopelessness. So again, kind of similar to the overengagement versus disengagement. Stress, you may notice a loss of energy, so just maybe feeling a bit more fatigued. But burnout then is losing motivation, ideals, and hope. So it's a more extreme version of feeling stressed. Stress can lead to anxiety disorders, whereas burnout can lead to detachment and depression. Mentioned on the other side, this other slide, about lower mood, maybe some feelings of anxiety as well. The primary damage of stress is physical. I don't know if you all have heard about the research of how stress impacts us a lot physically. That could be a whole other presentation. But burnout, the primary damage is emotional. Because you're having those feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, and that's way more emotional than it is physical. And then stress may kill you prematurely just because of those, physical impacts that happen as a result of being stressed. And then burnout may make life seem not worth living. Again, experiencing that helplessness, hopelessness, cynicism about the present and the future. All right, so again, discussion question. What warning signs of burnout do you notice within yourself? Because everyone may experience different sorts of warning signs for burnout. And what do you do when you begin to notice those warning signs? Where do you go? What support? What resources do you have? Who's in your support system? So feel free to take a few minutes again to talk with your table, and then we'll come back.
There, so I kind of like I always know that
lack of motivation. Usually I'm more of like a stressful person where I like overwork myself, but then sometimes it gets to the point where I'm overworking myself so much that I start feeling burnout, and that's kind of like where I am right now. So I'm trying to work on it. I have a great support system, and I have a fantastic support who's willing to help delegate other tasks, and so I don't have to worry about that as much. Obviously, they can't help me with school or work, but they can at least take some of the load off on the student work.
that's definitely a big difference this year versus last year.
Yeah, your e-board is bigger than it was.
Notice warning signs of burnout.
Our e-board is
I just take time to just
more
go back where you asked.
cohesive than it was. It's a huge,
I guess so.
huge difference. Like,
How about you guys?
like I thought we did okay last year, but then like this year, like we're a team who actually they like each other and are are enjoying the work that we're doing and are all willing to help do our stuff. And like, I don't have to like ask somebody to get something done. They'll offer to get something done. That is a big like weight off my shoulders.
We're kind of like that too in our group chat. Where, like, we'll talk about like something that needs to get done.
Mid-sentence,
We're
just
like,
shut up. And I was like, just kind of
like just today when we got the email, literally like a minute ahead, and I was like,
things, you know?
we're gonna pick that up.
Like that makes sense.
I tend to try to like take the
Yeah,
load for
I just push
everything.
myself a little too hard sometimes.
No,
What about
okay.
you?
I got this one. Thank you. Yeah, that is something that I'm working on.
Because we figured out exactly how many meetings there were for the semester.
It's really nice.
And then everybody took 2 meetings that they had like a 10 person of for creating the presentation and everything.
I got about you.
And like you knew when your meeting was, you could turn it to the bar and everything. So we're not. We both had the first.
I mean, I make the presentations for them all, but like,
All right, I dislike breaking up conversations because I hear a lot of wonderful conversations going on. I'm glad you all have time to connect, and maybe you're meeting new people, hopefully. That would be fun. But does anybody want to share on this question? I know it's a bit more personal and vulnerable. Yeah, thank you.
So I used to be heavily involved with this one particular youth leadership organization, to the point where as I was taking positions where I would be paid for it. Well, I held this one position for like 4 years, and I didn't realize how much stress had been put on me until the burnout hit me like really, really hard. But looking back, I realized that I kind of had some warning signs of disengagement, of kind of feeling like I don't want to just do this. I don't want to like be here. I don't want to be like alive. And so those are some warning signs I definitely should pay attention to. And eventually when I did kind of burn out, I walked away. I quit. I said I don't want to do this anymore. And so yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. At the end, you mentioned there just setting boundaries with yourself. Like you maybe noticed that you weren't being respected there, that they were asking too much of you, and you said, okay, I'm just going to be done. I'm going to do this for my own mental health, and that's okay. And yeah, thank you for sharing that, because you also mentioned the part about burnout being gradual, but then you also stated that it hit you. You know, like it was gradual up until the point that you were like, oh my gosh, this is real. Like I'm burned out right now. And I really appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. Does anybody else want to share? Yes, Kaylee?
Well, I tend to be someone who like overworks, and like when I'm stressed, I just go and put so much on my plate, and sometimes that can lead to burnout. Like I put so much on my plate that I end up disengaging from it completely and have no motivation. And when I get to that point, I just kind of talk to my support system. I have great friends, family, my e-board members, and I just see what other people can do to help, which it's really hard to ask for help, but sometimes, asking someone else to take on a task, can definitely make that workload feel way less unbearable.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that. It's so important to connect with people and to make sure that we do have a support system in place. And if you don't have a support system, just reaching out, maybe starting counseling, starting therapy, or just reaching out to somebody who you know is a safe person on campus to start up your support system so that you have people to go to and to talk to. There are also some national resources too that I'll mention if you need to talk to somebody. But again, connection is so important, and that really can decrease those feelings of burnout. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You mentioned too how the stress, if you're over-engaged, that was more of the stress, and then if it was prolonged and it became too much, that was when it started leading to burnout and leading to the disengagement. So you all are mentioning exactly what we were just talking about. So it's bringing more self-awareness to that. Maybe you weren't noticing that specifically in the past, but now you're reflecting on it and you're starting to notice that within your own life. Does anybody else want to share quick?
Yeah.
Yes.
I just noticed that I get a lot more like tired. Like I love to take naps and everything, but like when it starts to get to the point where I'm like, oh, like my friends invited me to do this thing, but also I can take a nap, and I choose to take a nap over hanging out with my friends. Like that's when I notice that I'm like, okay, like something's going on here. Um, Thankfully, working at UHCS, I have plenty of resources there, so I am able to talk to somebody whenever they're available, which is pretty much anytime that I'm there. But otherwise, I've also learned to really good to like delegate. So our e-board is really great with that. I mean, we figured out how many meetings in a semester, and we each took like 2 on to be a head person of. So we're really supportive of each other.
That's awesome. Yeah, delegating is so important, not just having all of that be on the president or secretary, VP, whoever it may be, whoever maybe has the brunt of it in an org. I know the president's job is to be like that main role, that main person, but making sure you're able to delegate different tasks to your e-board members. I mean, that's what they're there for, right? They're there to help you. So I'm sure they'll take on anything that, you need help with, and they also care about you and want to support you. So really, really important to advocate for yourself and to delegate. Thank you all for sharing. We'll move forward again. So you may all be wondering, how do we prevent burnout? How do we cope with burnout? Just because we have been talking about it for a bit now. Recognize, you all were mentioning this. So looking out for the warning signs of burnout, super, super important. So there's the psychological, the physical symptoms. And then being proactive about it, making sure that you know what you will do if you do start to experience burnout. So maybe it is reaching out to your support system. Maybe it is starting therapy or counseling before it gets too intense. Being proactive is really, really important for your own mental health. Seeking support. So again, talking with others, sharing what you've been going through. That's what Kaylee was mentioning. That's so important. And specifically because social supports help calm our nervous system and relieve stress. So there's a physical component to that. It's not only the emotional, the mental component, it's also the physical component of truly calming our nervous system. That's pretty cool, isn't it? Yeah, friends have that impact on us, family, whoever you're close with. So making sure, again, that you have supportive people you can talk to, very, very important. Reevaluating priorities too. We talked about setting boundaries, so important. If you can't take on a task and you need to say no, please feel like you can say no. Taking breaks, talked about that as well, super, super important. Practicing self-care, we also talked about that. Making sure that you know what you like to do for self-care and maybe writing that down so you know that going back to that when you are experiencing that burnout, you just have that piece of paper there or that note in your phone that lists all the things you like to do for self-care, because it can be kind of hard to remember what we like to do if we're feeling really stressed and overwhelmed. Focus on your hobbies and what you're truly passionate about. Passion really ignites us. It ignites our soul. So just knowing what we're super passionate about can be really, really helpful. Coping with mental health concerns. So burnout can lead to mental health concerns. So how do we cope with those concerns? Seeking support, again, super important. Talking to your support system about how you have been feeling. Whenever I'm meeting with students for a care team, I always make sure to ask them, who are supportive people in your life? Who do you consider to be a part of your support system? Because it's so important to know that, and then they start to notice, oh, I can go to this person when I'm not feeling well. I do have this person in my life that I can talk to. Seek out mental health resources. Therapy is amazing, support groups are amazing, national lifelines are great as well, and I'll share some of those specific resources in a few slides. And then don't keep it a secret if you are experiencing mental health concerns. I know that stigma is real. I know that certain cultures, may not put much of, or may not highlight mental health in their culture. So, but please just know that you deserve to get the support that you need and that there is support out there. I know that treatment can be really expensive. That's also a barrier. The stigma is a barrier as well. What's nice about being an enrolled student here is that we do have university health and counseling services and winter counseling services that are free for students to use, because if you're paying your fees anyway, why not use the resources, right? So I tell students this, I'm like, you're already paying for it, so why not use your resources? Asking for help does not make you weak. If anything, asking for help and being vulnerable shows strength. How many of you have heard that asking for help makes you weak? Or that you should be doing everything all on your own and that you don't need help from other people? Yeah, that's real. That's said all the time, but truly, nobody can get through life alone. We all need people. We cannot do it on our own. So if you are asking for help, if you're being vulnerable, if you are advocating for yourself, that shows immense strength, and know that. It's okay to ask for help. Practicing self-care. I know we've talked about it so much, but it's just so important. So self-care is an individual's conscious act to tend to their needs by being aware of their mind, body, and spirit. It is a continuous effort to maintain self-balance as a whole. I really like that quote as well. Of course I like it, that's why I added it into my presentation, but I just think it's so great because of it saying it's a conscious act. My supervisor likes to say that he doesn't really consider watching movies or shows self-care because it's kind of like a subconscious, unconscious act where it's like, oh, I'll just throw on this show to distract myself. He sees it as more of a conscious act where it's like, okay, what am I going to do right now for self-care? I'm going to take 10 deep breaths. I'm going to do a guided meditation. I'm going to sing. That's something I like to do. But it's so important that it is something that you're doing consciously, or whether it's exercise too, that's really important. Going on a walk, a mindful walk, noticing the leaves, the colors of the leaves changing on the trees outside because it's fall and it's so pretty. Self-care is super individualized, so what works for you may not work for others, and that's okay, but maybe just sharing with others what you like to do for self-care could give them ideas on what they could do for self-care. Just think about what helps you relax, what helps you feel calm, what helps you feel alive and passionate. That's where you're going to find those things that you want to do for self-care. Ask yourself those questions, and I'm sure you'll think about some things that work for you for self-care. I love this graphic. Ever since I found it on Instagram a year or two ago, I use it in almost every single presentation that I do. So this shows the different types of self-care. And what I think is really interesting is that a lot of people say that, oh, self-care is only, bubble baths, getting your nails done. And it can be that, but it's also many other things. And this graphic shows what that could look like. So, you have the physical, the emotional. A lot of people think about those things. The social too. Spiritual, personal, space, work, and then financial. That's something I never thought about before seeing this graphic. I was like, oh yeah, budgeting, saving money, that can be a form of self-care. It's just never something that I considered, but this graphic really opened up my eyes to things that I could be doing for self-care, and I hope that it's helpful for you all as well. What types of self-care do you practice? How do you make time for self-care? I'm trying to look at the time. I may just have this be something that you ponder just on your own. Maybe talk about it when you're doing the activity that Kaylee will talk about in a bit. Just think about it. And another quote that I found very recently that is hanging up in my office because it's so wonderful. True self-care is not salt baths and chocolate cake. It is making the choice to build a life you don't need to regularly escape from. Do any of you like that quote too? I thought it was awesome. So it just truly changed my perspective on self-care, and it's building this life that you want to be living, and that you're not just solely practicing self-care to escape the life that you're already in, to only be a distraction, but again, having it be that conscious thing that you're doing. Taking care of yourself doesn't mean me first, it means me too. Self-care is not selfish. We all have to take care of ourselves if we want to take care of other people and be there for other people. So overall, please take care of yourself. It's necessary for both your success, your team's success. Mental health is so important to be talked about at all times. And just remember that your wellness matters and supports are available. You deserve to get the help and support that you may need. I'll quickly go over some resources. So I mentioned University Health and Counseling Services, Winther Counseling Services. What's nice about UHCS, they have a crisis counselor available during their business hours, so 8 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. Something new this year is that if you call University Health and Counseling's number after hours, you will be connected to a crisis counselor in the area. So that is a new resource that started this year. There's Winther Counseling Services. Do you all know the difference between UHCS and Winther? I can kind of go through the difference if you're unsure. Does anybody need an explanation? It's okay if you do. No? Okay. The Dean of Students Office, which is where I work, we have our care team, which I mentioned toward the beginning. We provide mental health outreach and support. So if you're ever concerned about one of your friends, one of your e-board members, just one of your general members, you can fill out the care team form. I have it linked here. It's also really easy to find if you just search UW care team form. You'll find it there. You fill out this referral form. We reach out to the student. We make sure they're doing okay. We connect them to resources. And then if you have questions, you can call or email our office. Some off-campus and national resources. We have the Walworth County Crisis Line, Jefferson County Crisis Line. Those are great. Whitewater's half in Walworth, half in Jefferson County. It's a little strange, but just wanted to list both of them. Rock County as well. And then the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline used to be called the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It was that long 1-800-273-8255 number. But now it's way easier to remember. It is just 988, kind of like 911. You can call, text, or chat that number if you go on their website. So that's an awesome resource as well. Crisis text line, solely text-based. You know, if you just need to talk to somebody, it doesn't have to be related to a suicide crisis, but it can be. And even if you're concerned about somebody else being a risk to themselves, you can also call or text these numbers. Super, super, super helpful if you need them. And just know that if your life or someone else's life is in imminent danger, please call 911 instead of using these resources and state that you need support for a mental health crisis, just so that they know. I do have a mental health resources comprehensive list on here, so if any of you want that list, maybe either email me, I'll have that up on the slide, or just reply to this event invite and maybe we can send out that link to all of you. Liv's giving me the yes. Okay, we can do that. Awesome. What questions do you have? I think I'm running out of time, but if you have any questions, please, I can't really see the clock. I'm trying to look, but just let me know that if you have any questions, I'll be here for just a little bit longer. Those are references. And thank you all for being here. I really appreciate you all being here. Maybe, right now is a stressful time. So again, I just appreciate you all being here. Again, my email is up there. LinkedIn just for fun, I don't know, professional connections, but feel free to email me if you have any questions or email our office if you have any Dean of Students Office related questions. Thank you all again.